She was a lonely woman with no family left. Until one rainy day, she walked into an orphanage and saw a baby boy with eyes like silver staring into her soul. She adopted him without knowing his name, without knowing his past. But 20 years later, what she discovered about him would leave the entire world speechless, because this boy wasn't just abandoned. He was hidden, and the secret he carried could change a nation. Eleanor Winslow had grown used to quiet mornings. At 62, she lived alone in a quaint cottage on the edge of Maplewood, an old town cradled in history and silence. Her house was always warm, always smelling of baked scones and fresh roses. But behind the tidy hedges and lace curtains was a woman whose loneliness had begun to echo louder than the ticking of her antique clock. Her husband had passed 6 years earlier. No children, just memories. She volunteered at the local library, fed stray animals, and attended Sunday service in the same pew every week. Everyone in town knew Eleanor as kind, gentle, dignified. But no one knew the silence she carried. Then came the morning everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday in October. The wind howled gently outside her kitchen, brushing past the windows like forgotten ghosts. Eleanor had set the breakfast table, like always, 2 plates, 2 cups of tea out of habit. One side remained untouched. She stared at the empty seat. Something inside her stirred. A longing, a whisper, a pull. Without finishing her tea, she grabbed her coat, umbrella, and keys, then drove, not knowing where her heart was taking her. She ended up at the Maplewood Children's Shelter. The last time she'd stepped foot there was nearly a decade ago, back when she volunteered to knit winter scarves for the kids. She hadn't planned to go. She hadn't even thought of it. But something led her there that morning. Something unseen but undeniable. Inside, the air buzzed with the sound of children playing, crayons scribbling, a baby's cry in the distance. Eleanor stood by the doorway, uncertain, until a soft voice greeted her. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. I just wanted to look around," Eleanor replied, almost embarrassed. "I used to volunteer here, of course." "Feel free, we're short-staffed today, anyway." Eleanor wandered the halls aimlessly, her eyes scanning the rooms. Children of all ages laughing, reading, running. Then something stopped her. A small boy sat quietly in the far corner of the playroom. He looked no older than 2. Unlike the other children, he wasn't playing or babbling. He was just observing. His skin was deep brown, rich like polished mahogany. But it was his eyes that startled her, crystal gray, almost silver too. Striking for a child so small. He wasn't crying. He wasn't afraid. He was just watching the world like he'd seen too much of it already. Eleanor stepped closer. "What's his name?" she asked the shelter supervisor. "No records," the woman replied, glancing at the clipboard. "He was left at the door 3 weeks ago. No note, no ID, just this cloth bracelet on his wrist." Eleanor knelt beside the boy. He didn't flinch, he just looked up, calm and still. The bracelet on his wrist was hand-woven red and gold threads, with small faded letters stitched in. Eleanor's throat tightened. He looked so alone. "They all do at first," the woman said gently. "But this one, he's different. Barely cries. Doesn't speak yet, but it's like he understands everything." "Has anyone considered adoption?" Eleanor asked. The supervisor hesitated. "He has no documentation, no birth certificate. He's technically unregistered. The process would be complicated." Eleanor looked down at the boy again. "I'm not afraid of complicated," she whispered. And just like that, the course of her life changed. It took 6 months of paperwork, legal appointments, and fingerprinting. Eleanor used nearly all her savings and called in every favor she had. Some people thought she was going through a late-life crisis. Others whispered behind her back. But Eleanor didn't care. She named the boy Asher, meaning blessing and happiness. And when he finally came home, he walked across the threshold of that quiet cottage, and something long frozen inside Eleanor thawed. Asher grew up curious, calm, and remarkably intuitive. By age 3, he could identify classical music pieces just by hearing a few notes. At 5, he could solve puzzles meant for teens. He never got in trouble at school, never lied, never yelled. But there was always something about him, like he carried a history deeper than he could explain. He loved books. He loved rain. He loved fixing broken things, toys, clocks, even the old coffee maker that hadn't worked in years. Eleanor would sometimes catch him staring out the window, mumbling soft syllables under his breath. She once asked, "What are you saying, sweetheart?" "I don't know," he answered. "It just comes to me." When he was 10, Eleanor played a recording of his mumbling for a local professor. The man raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like Arakani. It's an ancient dialect from Western Africa, almost extinct." But how would he know that? The professor just shrugged. Some things are inherited in ways science can't explain. Eleanor never hid Asher's origins from him. On his 12th birthday, she handed him the faded cloth bracelet. "This was the only thing you had when I found you," she said gently. Asher stared at the initials. A.O. He looked up at her. "Do you think someone loved me before you?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "I don't know who left you, but I do know this: you were meant to find me, and I was meant to love you." From that day on, Asher never took off the bracelet. By 17, Asher was known as a prodigy. He had already won 2 national scholarships, tutored younger students in robotics and languages, and was accepted into a top international program in Switzerland. But one quiet night, Eleanor found him in the attic, staring at a worn envelope. Inside it, a photocopy of his intake form from the shelter. Scribbled in the corner in faint pencil was something no one had noticed before: a symbol. A strange spiral crossed by 3 dots. Asher traced it with his finger. And in that moment, something inside him stirred like a door slowly opening. A secret was waiting, and it was time to find it. The attic was dim. Dust motes dancing like ancient spirits in the shafts of golden light streaming through the window. Asher sat cross-legged on the creaking wooden floor. The photocopied intake form spread before him, the symbol at the bottom haunting him like a whisper from another life, a spiral intersected by 3 dots. It looked almost decorative at first, like a forgotten doodle, but something deep within him stirred every time his eyes met it. Not recognition exactly, but a powerful unease. A flicker of memory he couldn't reach. He took out his phone and searched symbols, tribal marks, old flags, ancient languages. Nothing matched. Nothing even came close. That night, he couldn't sleep. Downstairs, Eleanor was reading by the fire. When she heard the creak of the stairs, Asher stood at the edge of the living room, eyes wide, holding the old paper in his hand like it was made of glass. "Gran," he said. He'd always called her that, Gran, even though she wasn't technically old enough. It was his way of honoring the bond between them. She looked up and saw the intensity in his expression. "I think I'm supposed to find something," he whispered. Eleanor closed her book. "Then we'll find it together." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Asher reached out to language professors, anthropologists, symbologists, anyone who might recognize the spiral and dots. Most replies were generic. A few said it resembled proto-symbolic glyphs from pre-colonial West Africa, but none could give a definite origin. Until he received an unexpected email. Subject: the symbol you sent from Professor Jamila Fofana Institution, the University of Sierra Leone. Asher, this symbol is not publicly documented, but I've seen it once before, inside a sealed family record belonging to a lost dynasty in the Ivory Coast. It's believed to be the sigil of a secret lineage of healers and resistance leaders, known as the Kulum. That record was destroyed in the civil unrest years ago. How did you find this symbol? Please contact me directly. This may be more than coincidence. Asher's heart pounded. The Kaloum? A lost dynasty? The email felt too wild to be real. But something in his gut said, "It is real. And you're a part of it." 2 days later, Eleanor and Asher were on a plane to Africa. Eleanor insisted on coming, though he protested at first. "Gran, it might be dangerous." She only smiled. "You're my child. I've already crossed oceans. For you in my heart, let's make it real." They landed in Sierra Leone during the rainy season. The air was thick and fragrant, alive with 1,000 sounds, roosters crowing, rain tapping rooftops, and the gentle hum of a people that had endured. Professor Fofana met them at the dusty university gates. She was in her 60s, her braided silver hair wrapped in a cobalt scarf, her eyes sharp with purpose. She didn't waste time. "I wasn't entirely honest in my email," she said, guiding them to her private study. "The Kaloum, just a lost dynasty. They were protectors, guardians of wisdom passed down orally through generations. They opposed colonial puppet regimes and corrupt leaders. But when war broke out, they were hunted, erased from history." Asher sat frozen. She opened a hidden drawer in her cabinet and pulled out a fragile leather-bound book scorched at the edges. "This is the only known surviving text from the Kaloum line." She turned to a yellowed page and pointed. There it was. The symbol, spiral, 3 dots. "This is called the Seal of Silence," she explained. It was only worn by children born into the Kaloum line who were under direct threat. It signified their identities were to be hidden, erased from record, even memory, until it was safe. Eleanor leaned forward. "Are you saying Asher is part of this?" Fofana turned to Asher. "I believe your family may have been royalty. Not by crown, but by purpose. Do you have anything else from your infancy?" Asher unclipped the red gold bracelet from his wrist. Professor Fofana's hands trembled slightly as she held it under the light. "This bead," she murmured, "isn't just decorative. It's hollow, possibly a key capsule." With gentle care, she used a precision tool to twist off the tiny cap. Inside was a curled strip of fiber-thin metal. Etched on it, numbers. A long string of them, coordinates. Eleanor gasped. Asher was silent. "Where do they lead?" he asked quietly. Fofana pulled up a digital map and entered the sequence. The map zoomed in on a dense stretch of forest outside the capital city. "Here," she whispered. "This is Kaloum land, or what's left of it." They set out the next morning. The journey was not easy. Their guide was a former student of Fofana's, a man named Thao, who had grown up hearing whispered stories about the Kaloum but never believed them. Until now. Hours into the jungle, the path disappeared. They walked through tangled vines, over streams, past trees older than most nations. Then Thao stopped. There, at the base of a large baobab tree, hidden behind underbrush, was a stone structure. Cracked and overgrown, but unmistakably man-made. Asher approached the sealed door. Etched into the stone, the spiral and dots. He reached into his pocket and removed the bead with the metal coil. He inserted it into a groove. Beneath the symbol, a soft click echoed. The door creaked open. Inside was a chamber no larger than a small classroom. The air was thick with dust and history. On the walls, tapestries. Portraits of men and women with eyes like Asher's, piercing, pale, and haunting. And in the center, a wooden box. He opened it. Inside were papers, genealogies, letters, names, and a weathered photograph. A woman, dark-skinned, radiant, holding a baby with gray eyes. On the back of the photo, handwritten in English, "To my son Asher, if you ever find this, know that I loved you enough to let you go. You were never abandoned. You were protected." Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, tears falling freely. Asher stood still, the photo shaking in his hands. A truth buried for decades had finally found its way home. The chamber beneath the baobab tree was silent. But the truth inside it roared through Asher's mind like a storm that had waited 2 decades to be heard. He sat cross-legged on the earthen floor, surrounded by crumbling documents, old family seals, and names, so many names, all leading to one conclusion. He was not merely a forgotten orphan. He was the last living heir of the Kulum line. The letters detailed a plan, a desperate strategy to protect the last royal child from death as civil war tore through their people. His mother, Amina Kulum, had given him the bracelet and marked it with the seal of silence, entrusting rebel allies to sneak him out of the country through underground passageways and bribe-driven handovers, until he ended up in the United States, nameless, undocumented, alone, not abandoned, hidden, protected, and in the center of all this history stood Eleanor, her heart split wide open. Not because she felt betrayed, but because she realized just how much weight her son had been carrying in silence. "You always seemed like you came from somewhere greater," she said, her voice trembling. "Now I know you did." Asher held up the photo of the woman with the fierce smile and the same gray eyes. "She gave me up so I could live. And I raised you," Eleanor replied, placing a hand gently over his, "so you could become more than what the world expected." Back in Sierra Alan, Professor Fofana arranged a confidential meeting with a man she believed could help. His name was Minister Jabril Sani, part of the new democratic government that had risen from the ashes of the fractured regime. He had once been a rebel messenger, and when he saw the documents Asher brought back from the chamber, his hands trembled. "You are Amina's son," he said in awe. "I carried her last letter through the jungle on foot. I watched her fall to protect her people." The minister made an offer Asher hadn't expected. "The Kulum legacy still lives in our blood. But we need leadership, honest, young, visionary leadership. Your story could unite this nation." Asher swallowed. "Are you asking me to run for office?" "We're asking you," the minister replied gently, "to help us rebuild what your family once fought for." The air felt too tight in his lungs. He stared out the window, where vendors shouted in the street and children kicked a deflated soccer ball, with joy untouched by politics. For 20 years he had been building a future with his mind, with code, with reason. "Not with power. I didn't come here for a throne," he said at last. "I came here for the truth," Minister Sani nodded. "And truth is what makes real leaders." That night, Asher sat under the stars beside Eleanor in the garden of their guest house. She was shelling peanuts into a bowl, an old habit when she was nervous. "I think I'm scared," Asher admitted. "Good," she replied without looking up. "That means your heart's still human. What if I don't belong here?" "You belong wherever you choose to love, Asher. Blood makes family, but love makes home. You taught me that." Asher leaned his head on her shoulder, just like he did as a child. The truth didn't push her away. It brought them closer. And in that moment, he made a decision, not out of ambition, but of responsibility. He wouldn't lead a government, but he would light a path. Within weeks, Asher returned to Switzerland with Eleanor and Professor Fofana. But he didn't return to school. Instead, he founded a private foundation called the Kulum Trust. It wasn't political. It wasn't loud. But it was powerful. With the documents recovered from the Baobab chamber, Asher was able to access old accounts, long abandoned aid funds that had been laundered and hidden by fleeing leaders. Through international legal channels and biometric matches, he proved his identity and reclaimed what rightfully belonged to the people. With that money, he began rebuilding a technology hub for local students in Sierra Leone, a clean water pipeline in the northern drought zone, a scholarship program for orphan children in West Africa, a library in Ventari province bearing his mother's name, Amina House of Knowledge. But Asher never once put his face on a billboard. He never gave interviews. He never signed his name on a plaque. He worked in silence, just like his mother had. protected him in silence. The seal that once marked secrecy had now become a symbol of healing. One afternoon, while organizing the digital archives for the Kaloum Trust, Eleanor found a file labeled Final Gift. She clicked it open and gasped. It was a video, grainy, with dust lines and flickers of static. A woman's face filled the screen. She looked straight into the camera, her voice shaking but determined. To the child who carries this, you are not born of fear. You are born of hope. If you find this, it means the chain was never broken. You are my son, you are Kaloum. But more than that, you are free. Eleanor watched it twice before showing Asher. When it ended, he didn't cry. He simply stood, opened the drawer where he kept the bracelet, and kissed the red and gold thread before placing it gently back. His eyes gleamed, not with pain, but with purpose. 6 months later, the Kaloum Trust received an anonymous nomination for the Global Impact Prize, recognizing unseen humanitarians who changed the world through quiet acts of service. At the award ceremony, the spotlight scanned the audience, but Asher wasn't there. Instead, Eleanor walked onto the stage. She wore a simple lavender dress and held a letter in her hands. I'm not the honoree, she said, but I'm the reason he exists as he does. The crowd fell silent. My son didn't grow up in a palace. He grew up in a little house on Elm Street with a broken toaster and a cat named Franklin. He didn't have bloodline pride or ancestral power. What he had was kindness. What he has is purpose. She paused, lifting her head proudly. His name is Asher Kaloum Winslow. And even if you never see his face, you'll see his work in the water you drink, the books your children read, and the schools your country rebuilds. He is the echo of a woman who gave him up to save him, and the legacy of love that raised him. After the audience rose in applause, many with tears in their eyes, Eleanor stepped down, her heart full. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, in a small village where the Kaloum Trust had just built a new solar school, Asher watched the live stream on his laptop. He smiled. Then he closed the screen and went back to helping a little girl learn to spell her name. 20 years earlier, Asher had been found beneath flickering fluorescent lights, wrapped in a thin blanket, his tiny wrist bound with a cloth bracelet no one understood. Now, standing in front of the Maplewood Children's Shelter, he was no longer a boy searching for answers. He was a man carrying answers home. The building hadn't changed much. The same creaky welcome sign, the same paint-chipped windows. But inside, everything felt different. Perhaps it wasn't the walls that had changed. Perhaps it was Asher. He had returned not as the lost child, but as the one who had found purpose through pain. And he wasn't alone. Eleanor walked beside him, a few gentle gray streaks now softening. Her curls, her cane tapping rhythmically against the tiled floor. The staff welcomed her with warm hugs and brighter eyes. After all, Eleanor was a familiar face here. But they didn't yet recognize the tall, poised young man at her side, until she said simply, "This is my son." And silence swept the room like a breeze through tall grass. They had come with a plan, but not the kind written in spreadsheets or legal drafts. Asher had used the past year to quietly fund a complete renovation of the shelter where he was first left behind. Not for recognition, not for closure, but for hope for every child who would walk through those doors feeling forgotten. He called the initiative the First Light Project. Because for him, this place had been the first flicker of a story that almost never began. Now, it would become the beginning of many. The ceremony was quiet. No press. Just local families, a handful of volunteers, and the children wide-eyed, bright-spirited, curious. Asher knelt beside a little boy who clutched a toy dinosaur with chipped paint. "What's his name?" Asher asked. The boy blinked. "Roar." Asher laughed gently. "That's a good name." The boy frowned. "My mama left me." Asher looked into his eyes too young to carry that kind of hurt. "She didn't leave you," Asher said softly. She made space for you to grow into something big. Something roaring. The boy smiled, his arms tightening around the toy. Eleanor stood nearby, watching. It was in moments like these, subtle, unscripted, where she saw Asher's truest self. Not in accolades or honors, but in how he saw invisible people. How he restored value where others saw none. He had inherited a legacy of power. Yes, but he had chosen a legacy of healing. Later that night, they returned home back to the little house on Elm Street, where the porch light still buzzed and the lavender bloomed in messy pots Eleanor refused to trim. Asher found an old shoebox. In his childhood closet, tucked beneath forgotten comic books and mismatched socks. Inside was the original bracelet, now frayed but sacred. He turned it over in his hands. Once, this had been the only clue to who he was. A whisper in thread and cloth. Now, it was a reminder of how far he'd come. That night, he sat with Eleanor. At the kitchen table, the one where she used to read him bedtime stories and sneak him extra cookies. They were sipping hot cocoa, the way they always did on cool nights. When she looked up suddenly, "You know," she said, "when I adopted you, I thought I was saving you." Asher smiled. "And now you don't?" She shook her head. "Now, I know you were sent to save me." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. Months passed. Then one day, an invitation arrived. Embossed, official, bearing the seal of the United Nations. Asher had been selected to deliver the closing keynote at the annual Youth for Peace Summit in Geneva. Not because of his past, but because of what he had done with it. Eleanor helped him pick out a suit, nothing too flashy, just gray with a navy tie. She sewed a tiny spiral with 3 dots into the lining of the jacket, where only he would know. It was their dot when he stepped onto the stage. The hall was packed. Delegates, students, educators, diplomats. But Asher didn't look at them. He looked into the camera because he knew somewhere across the world, children like him were watching, children with no papers, children with questions, children carrying silence like luggage too heavy for their backs. And he spoke. "I was once left behind. I was once unnamed. I was once a boy with nothing but a cloth bracelet and a quiet woman who said, 'You are not too much for me. I am not a prince. I am not a prophet. I am a seed that grew because someone watered me with kindness. And now I plant that kindness wherever I go.'" The applause didn't just come from the room. It came from corners of the globe as the speech went viral across youth networks, schools, and communities. Eleanor watched it from home, her knitting needle still in her lap, her glasses fogged with tears. Years later, a marble plaque was placed at the newly expanded Maplewood Children's Shelter. It read, "The First Light Project, in honor of those who are lost, and those who light the way home." Established by Asher Kalum Winslow, 2025, below the plaque, etched in smaller letters were the words, "Raised by love, reclaimed by legacy, remembered by choice, and every spring, without fail." Eleanor and Asher would return to that shelter to read stories to the new children. He always brought the same, but the boy with the bright eyes, and read it aloud. Beneath the blooming magnolia tree in the courtyard. One year, a little girl raised her hand and asked, "Is that story real?" Asher smiled. "It's as real as the love that wrote it." And Eleanor, sitting quietly beneath her sun hat, whispered to herself, "Yes, it's all real. Every word. Every miracle." The end.